evening to you. Welcome to Kivumbi 2017. A lot has happened today. For those of you who've been following what has been happening in the news, politically, legally, there has been a lot that has been happening. So let's have a conversation about what has happened today and what some of what was expected to happen today that didn't happen. Of course, I'm talking about the NASA communication that was supposed to happen today. So in studio, right next to me on my immediate right, I have Nelson Harvey, who's a political analyst and a lawyer as well. But for purposes of this conversation, we are trying to pick his legal mind because there's a lot of legal things that are happening today. Right next to him, we have Dismas Moko, who's a political risk analyst. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I can see Javas Bigambo in studio as well. He'll be joining them in a couple of minutes. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on Kivumbi 2017. Harvey, good to see you. Listen, there's a communication that was given to NASA, to the NASA Deputy Presidential Agent on availability of Form 34A and 34B. I'm hoping my cameras can focus on the Super Bowl because that has the reaction, or rather what was contained in the letter that IEBC sent to NASA. NASA had demanded for Form 34As. And there we go. So that is the response that IEBC sent to NASA. I'm hoping we can get that on the screen for our viewers to see. There we go. So IEBC says the Commission is in a position to provide all the requested Form 34Bs immediately. We are, however, not able to supply Form 34As at the moment, but the same shall be availed to you as soon as possible. And it was signed by IEBC CEO Ezra Chiloba. Gentlemen, allow me to pick your minds on this, putting in mind that the results are all out there and the winner has already been declared. Dismas, what goes through your mind? We don't have Form 34As, but we can give you 34Bs.
You know, for IEBC, they were required to create predictable systems which would give us unpredictable outcomes. And these systems were supposed to fall into so many parameters. One of the key parameters is that one needs to verify those systems. So now, and when you are doing research, it's unlikely that you can come to a conclusion without primary data. So one assumes before they came to a conclusion on Form 34B, they added the 34A. Now, if they're unable to provide this information to one of the interested parties, then it leaves so many questions unanswered, and it creates room for a lot of rumors and propaganda, alternative facts, alternative news, that in fact there's a bit of mischief. Because one would have expected that as soon as NASA requested for this information, it would be made available instantly without any delay. And now when the CEO says that we'd be able to give you this information, however, we are not able to, and we are going to give you the information as soon as possible.
As soon as we get it.
It doesn't even give a timeline. And you know, if you're a Christian, it reminds you of the Bible. When Jesus said, I'm coming soon. People have been waiting for a long time. So even for Chiloba, when they say that we are going to give you this information as soon as possible. Yeah. So you see right now, there's about 50% of Kenyans who believe that President Kenyatta has won this election in a free, fair, and credible manner. There's another 50% which believes that there's a mischief going on somewhere. There's there are conversations in very loud murmurs about a software-generated leadership, about a computer-generated leadership. So if you don't provide this information, then this guy is now saying, okay, this is the deal. Because unless you get maybe Nelson understands this, that you can actually
Nelson can break it down for us.
You can have 34B in the absence of 34A. The only comparison.
Great, you have 34A at the polling station, then it's taken to the results are taken to the constituency level where we generate 34B, then it comes to the National Tallying Center where we generate 34C.
But you see, there was supposed to be a very structured approach to this. The only comparison would be the Immaculate Conception. There's no way you can have that 34B without A. And if you don't provide it in good time, then the NASA guys, wherever they are, when they saw this thing in the newspapers, they said, okay, this confirms our worst fears.
It was a newspaper. It was actually a letter to them.
Yeah, a letter, yeah. Of course, now it's all over. Now, people in NASA are saying, all along, we've been telling you that there's mischief going on.
Now you see?
Yeah. Now, Chiloba and company are finding themselves in a very precarious situation. And you know, this one, there's been a chain of events. Number one, there was the raid on the NASA Tallying Center. Number two, there was the so-called assassination of Musando. You know, all these things, it seems that they are falling into place, and it will be very hard to convince Raila Odinga that his votes were not compromised. Any rational human being would imagine that now the goose is coming home.
Harvey?
I think this is very simple. you go home to your compound, you left a hen there that was about to lay an egg. Now you find an egg, and the hen is not there. Then you ask, where is the hen?
Where did the egg come from?
Give me some time, I look for the hen. But I have the egg here. Now that is the chronology of events that surrounds what we are having right now. There is no way you'll have originated a Form 34B without a Form 34A. And there are two ways in which to interpret Chiloba's action. Either Chiloba is playing delay tactics to prevent whosoever may be aggrieved with the declaration that was made on Friday from originating a presidential election petition in good time, bearing in mind that the time lapses...
they only have up to Friday.
Yes, it's just Friday. That is one option. The other option will be, and bearing in mind the egg chicken example, that they don't have Form 34A.
Legally, what does that mean? They don't have Form 34A?
Then if that be the case, then this entire declaration is a fraud, because the law was designed in a manner that the will of the people was to be determined at the lowest level, the polling station. Now, the polling station, the person oversighting the count, the presiding officer, was supposed to count, and upon giving the people present a declaration of what that count was, to transmit it directly to the constituency returning officer, and at the same time to the National Tallying Center. So this was to go simultaneously. Now, by the time the Tallying Center was receiving the Form 34B, it ought to have received Form 34A. Now, we have a situation whereby they're indicating that they only have Form 34B and they don't have Form 34As. Now, something is not adding up. And the only logical conclusion that we can draw out of those facts surrounding these circumstances that either somebody is hiding or somebody is playing monkey business to ensure that justice does not come to fruition.
So whichever way, they have to look for the Form 34As and make sure they're
Well, they have to give us the Form 34A.
Us, okay. Have we?
Well, the Kenyan public, not me. Yeah, and I think I'm part of the Kenyan public for that purpose.
Okay. So let's see how that plays out as the day goes by, as the week goes by. So there's something else interesting that happened today. The NGOs Coordination Board deregistered the Kenya Human Rights Commission for alleged tax evasion, illegal bank accounts, and illegal hiring of expatriates. The NGO Coordinating Board also wants Africa Center for Open Governance, otherwise known as AFRICOG, shut down. So let's listen to the sentiments of some of the leaders at KHRC, then we can have a conversation in studio.
The KHRC maintains the highest level of financial and operational integrity as demonstrated by our consistent and full compliance with statutory obligations. We are up to date in our filings with the NGO Coordination Board as well as other statutory bodies and have received no queries or citations in respect of our filings. The logical conclusion, therefore, is that this is an act of intimidation and attempt to shrink civic space rather than enforcement of the law. The brazen nature of this attempt also calls to question whether this errant public officer enjoys political support to undertake such an abuse of office. Because of the substance of this latest attack, the substance of this latest attack mirrors that which the KHRC experienced in January 2017 and before that in 2015 when we obtained the High Court judgment, the KHRC remains ready to yet again seek legal recourse.
Okay, so that was the response we had from Kenya Human Rights Commission this afternoon, I believe. So allow me to reintroduce my guests. We have an additional face here. We have Javas Bigambo, who's a political analyst on my immediate right. Thank you for making time for Kivumbi.
Thank you so much.
Of course, we have Nelson Harvey, who's a lawyer. Right next to me, we have Dismas Mukwo's a political risk analyst. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Javas, because you've not spoken on this show, let me ask you, what are your thoughts about the back and forth on the NGOs?
Well, there are various perspectives to this. One, there are those who hold the thought and the view, which is largely entertained by some quarters, that it is a practice or an aspect of witch hunting.
Is it?
Because of various tasks and pronouncements by those identified non-governmental organizations. Then there are those who look at it from the other perspective, that it is possible that the claims being made by the National NGO Coordination Board could be true. Now, the test to this...
But the question is, Javas, at what point did they realize all these allegations they're raising?
And in fact, that now raises the audit query. And if at all it is true that these claims are right, then question would be pointed to the NGO Coordination Board, that when did it come to their realization that there has been an aspect of tax evasion? And if at all it is the veracity, then again question arises. Is it possible that the Coordination Board has been sitting on its hands? And then who is it that can be blamed for that? Will they take the blame? But then again, still, the question will not end there, because they will say that maybe it's a question of not using their eyes, to comb through issues with a toothpick. Then they'll say that they want to purge all those that have been evading tax, and that it is their statutory responsibility to raise the red flag whenever they take note of such issues arising. Still, if that would be the truth, if it stands the test of time, then you wouldn't stand on their way for purposes of having the regulatory measures taken in that right direction. So it's a whole conundrum of issues that arise.
Harvey, you've just tweeted something about an hour ago. You said Fazul has no powers to deregister HRC without notice and a hearing, nor can he order closure of AfriCog, which is not an NGO but a company.
Now, Fazul sits in that so-called board on a temporary basis, because practically it has been disbanded by operation of law. Now, over and above that, there is a requirement under the law that in the event that there is a reason to warrant action being taken against an NGO, the NGO must be given 14 days notice of that default and required to give its answer as to why there has been a default. And then after a satisfactory inquiry by the board, it's only then that the board can make a decision. Now, the case of the Kenya Human Rights Commission is quite peculiar, because it was in court not so long ago for the same reasons that have been cited in the letter by Fazul. And the court made a decision that the board did not have the mandate to make that decision, and that the decision was made in total disregard of the right of Kenya Human Rights Commission to be given a notice and to be given a hearing. So to that extent, the decision by Fazul is null and void. It is my expectation that in the event that it will be taken before a court of law, and it's likely it has already gone before a court of law, a declaration to that effect will be made. Now, let's look at AfriCog. Now, Fazul seems to labor in the misinformation that AfriCog is a non-governmental organization. But if you interrogate the origin of AfriCog, AfriCog is a company limited by guarantee. So it has no relationship whatsoever. Neither can it be oversighted by the board that Fazul claims to chair. So to that extent, the entire decision, insofar as it relates to those two organizations, is flawed. Maybe, and from what Javez has said, this appears to be a well-planned crackdown on civil society and on the right of association.
Why?
As well.
Because of the timing?
The timing is quite peculiar, because these organizations have been in the forefront of pushing for a credible election. In fact, most of the litigation that we have seen preceding the general election was originated by some of these two individuals. And there is a publicly held view that these individuals were preparing an election petition to be filed in the Supreme Court in the course of this week. Now, you can see, in light of those circumstances, it's possible to perceive malice and high-handedness in the decision by Fazul.
Dismas.
When you look at the chronology of events, you have to agree with what Mr. Harvey is talking about. Because as soon as we had the election, the two NGOs, especially the one headed by Mr. Kegoro, they had a news conference. And they said there was an inconsistency and poor management of results. About,
even Maina Kiai is on record just questioning those numbers, saying what you're seeing are not results.
He actually said that those are merely numbers, they're not results, they're not accompanied by images. And there's a very high probability that that's the kind of information or revelation that makes a certain part of our political elite uncomfortable. And as he has indicated, they were preparing to go to the Supreme Court. So there's no better way of ruffling feathers than issuing that kind of
timing
letters.
is so wrong, you know?
You see, the timing would be wrong depending on where you sit in the political space. If you are comfortable with the status quo, you'll break into a dance and song and punch the air and say, this is it. But if you're on the other side of the political space, then you begin to ask so many questions. And as we grow as a society and we want to respect the rule of law and order, there are so many questions one may like to ask Fazul. Number one, does he have the power or capacity to direct the governor of central bank on how to run his business?
Does he have
on
the
which
power?
accounts to open and
No, he
operate?
doesn't have such a power.
Okay, so we
So
can
that's
get
number
answers
one,
here.
Instant answers.
Yeah.
Number two, does he have the power, the capacity to direct the director of CID to start investigations?
Again, he doesn't have such a powers.
Now, then we go now to the third question. On whose interest is he acting? You know, the Victorian have got a saying, you pay is the piper calls the tune. In this instance, on whose instructions is he acting? Whose lapdog is he?
Just plead the fifth.
Because, you know, you'd expect a public servant of a high rank like him to have the benefit of legal counsel before issuing this kind of instructions.
But Mokwa, I think you are expecting too much out of Fazul. In fact, there's credible rumor, and I think it's now in the realm of public notoriety, that Fazul himself will not even have qualified for the job that he's holding right now. So maybe that will explain why he doesn't see the necessity of sitting here.
Okay, you know, he may not be qualified for that position, but, you know, he can have the benefit of a team of advisors. Before he does this kind of letter, you would expect you would have maybe one of your classmates, a lawyer, to go through the letters and advise him to whether or not it makes a lot of sense. But you see, that the most important thing here is that we, as a nation right now, 50% of the nation is bleeding, literally. Others are dying, and others have got emotional torture. And any kind of movement or intervention from a public servant said to be leaning on the Jubilee side raises unnecessary suspicion. Because right now, the members of the civil society are saying, because we've been pointing out mischiefs during this electoral process, we are being punished for merely doing our work. And civil society all over the world is an indispensable proposition in any democratic society. Because it's, like for instance, in Kenya, you wouldn't be talking about a democracy. Probably wouldn't even be having the freedom of speech to have this conversation without civil society. I mean, Kiraitu Murungi sent out a tweet today who's been elected as a governor. He's saying that when they founded this civil society, this body, it had very solid intentions and ambitions. And they've made so much progress. And as Xavier has indicated, if, for instance, these guys have got a budget of 1.2 billion, as the allegations go, they've been playing around with, they've been paying directors money and maybe hiding it, doing creative accounting, they've refused to give the taxpayers resource. There's the procedure of the rule of law and order. Give them notice, ask them to come and show cause as to why they shouldn't be registered. When they fail, then kick them out, follow the right procedures. Because, you know, right now people are beginning to say, are we sliding back to single-party dictatorship?
Yeah, that is the question.
Is there somebody who wants to suppress our civil liberties? So those are the many questions we're asking. And this comes at a very untimely time after the observers gave some observations.
Trust me, you're having a very different conversation about observers.
No. You know, the last couple of days, we've had so many observers in Kenya who've said that Kenya is a very good place, the democratic space is solid, and then a few minutes later, you're following it with these draconian actions. I think is unacceptable. And maybe you should invite Fazul for a conversation.
No, first of all, it's interesting that you mentioned observers. We are going to have a whole different conversation. John Kerry is being bashed left, right, center over the Kenyan election, so that's a conversation that's coming up. Javas, there are those who say there have been calls for those who have been aggrieved in this particular election to go to the courts, and some of the civil society members are saying we are the people essentially should have gone to court. Now, when this happens, that almost seems like we're clawing back on the civil liberties that we have in this country.
Well, and they are right to speak so. However, we must appreciate that in view of the matters that are happening in the country today, whether it's that which is facing the civil society organizations or matters political following the disputed presidential election by the NASA team, our constitution is very clear in its stipulation that each person has a right to fair administrative action. And that is why if there are issues pointed out by failures or limitations on the part of the non-governmental organizations, then they need to have their right place, before the courts of law. And such action or directives must not be expedited beyond even the provisions of law that also gives ground where such rights of a person must not be limited only on the whims of a particular individual.
Okay.
And that is why at the moment it may seem that the directive that has come through communication of the letter from the NGO Coordination Board, that somebody could be acting on the whims or directives of somebody else, some other unseen powers. Okay. And you know, in politics, perception is king. And when perception now starts, sweeping across the prairies of the country, that there could be some manipulation as to the directions given by the NGO Coordination Board, then that casts the acts and, say, omissions of that board into negative light. I wouldn't want to wade into matters of perceptions about the qualifications of Fazul himself. I don't want to bathe in the sun of speculation. So I will leave that one there to a different discussion. Okay. But when it comes even to matters election, I think whether it is politicians themselves, whether it's political parties, whether it's the NGOs, let us face it. If we are a country that believes in the rule of law, then wouldn't we want to entertain the thought that while other political avenues are still at our disposal, it would be also making sense to see how we can exploit the avenues of the law. Okay. Because we went to elections because the law provides that the election should take place at a particular time on a particular date. That's our constitution. Yeah. Now, individuals who win certain seats will take oath of office based on the law. So if we appreciate and respect the rule of law, then again, it may make sense that we do not have to disregard the law itself.
Okay. Javi, talk to me about the Local Public Benefits Organization Act, which repealed the NGO Coordination Act.
Now,
because that is where the conversation starts.
The effect of that act was to remove from existence the previous act that gave Fazul the mandate to be in office. Now, Fazul is in office on a transitional basis. Now that he's on a transitional basis, there are limitations on what he can do and what he cannot do.
Okay, what are these limitations?
And what we have set out is quite clear. For instance, he cannot be able to give a directive to the governor of central bank. He cannot be able to give a directive to the director of public prosecution. His powers are so limited. In fact, very recently, that office was moved to the Ministry of Interior and Coordination. Remember at one point in time, Honorable Mangi Njuri had disbanded that entire board. And it was for good reason that he had done so. But for whatever reason, somebody superior in the administration thought it wise to still house this board that gives Fazul a lot of power. Now, to that extent, if you interrogate the manner in which Fazul has been acting, look, he started with the Kalonzo Musyoka Foundation. Yeah. He went to the Kidero Foundation. He targeted the Rosemary Odinga. And now he has targeted a key human rights NGO. He's targeted AFRICOG. There can be no other reason than that explained by my colleagues here. This is a crackdown intended to ensure that the time frame set out under the Constitution and other laws for the assumption of office or for challenging specific holders of those offices as a result of an election is not met. And you see, this has been the pattern with which certain individuals within the Republic of Kenya have tried to defeat the cause of justice. They delay or scuttle an otherwise elaborate legal process like procurement to ensure that time is not there. For instance, if by Friday a petition will not have been filed by these NGOs, if by Friday the documents will not have been provided by IBC to enable the filing of that petition, then what will the court say? That it's been overtaken by events. And this is the narrative that we have been hearing time after time. So basically, this is whenever a legitimate claim comes to interrogate these institutions.
Okay, Javas, you get the final word, then we move on.
When it comes to the issue of the non-governmental organizations, I think I would say this, that the legal political herring wing will not help us at all. The rights and responsibilities of these organizations are preserved in law. Yeah. Then I think it would be proper that these organizations make their way to the courts and make sure that they are not and even the operation is not contorted.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. You're saying they need to make their way to court. Harvey says Fazul has very limited power. Some of these things he's doing cannot even...
But you see, and that's where, when you go to the courts, all right, you see, the courts will pronounce themselves on this matter.
Once and for all.
Because it will make it clear. Because, for example, as my relative here said, that...
Who is your relative between these two?
And Brother Happy has indicated that, yes, and it's true that he does not have the powers to direct the governor of central bank or the CAD, the director of CAD, to take any action whatsoever. But you see, this individual or this leader may carry on with that presumption that such rights are on his shoulders. So when the court pronounces itself on this matter, then it will be very clear to him and to any other individual, even those who will follow him later in that position.
Final word on Fazul, NGOs?
You see, the thing is, and this is a mystery, how does one would imagine Fazul is a normal public servant. Where does he get this energy from to keep on breaking the rule with the impunity? Because, this is not the first time he's doing this.
Yeah.
He seems to come, he breaks the rules, he goes home a very happy man, probably gets a pay rise. And nobody ever takes action. One would have expected that the head of the public service would actually reprimand him, because this is giving President Kenyatta a very bad light. He's supposed to be in charge of a nation which respects the rule of law and order.
But
and then you've got your public servants.
Is Fazul acting on his own motion?
Well, I'm assuming that he's a public servant, and the head of the public service reports to the President of the Republic of Kenya. And one would imagine that the President, in as much as probably doesn't read newspapers, but the head of the public service gets to brief him of what is happening on a day-to-day basis. Now, you can imagine the American ambassador is going through these reports, the British High Commissioner, European Union, and they're beginning to ask themselves, what is happening to President Kenyatta? While in fact, maybe it's an overzealous public servant who wants to please the president, maybe he suspects that there's a very good case by NASA, which may find its way to the Supreme Court, and he wants to suppress that, being very overzealous. So that's why one would have expected his boss, or maybe the CS for Interior, or the acting, or rather, the PS for Interior, or the acting CS, to tell this gentleman, calm down,
slow down.
You are hurting our reputation. Okay. But in the absence of those reprimands, then it's safe to assume that he's got blessings from the highest office in the land to engage in this mischief.
Okay, Harvey?
I think Fazul is not acting on his own. Most likely, let me put it not most likely. Somebody is sanctioning what Fazul is doing. And if the international community has ears and eyes, they must
already
say...
They've already started reacting to it, by the way.
They came here to oversight an election and say it was good. We didn't see any problem. Now, I think it's high time for them to listen to whoever says nothing works in the manner it's supposed to be done here. And I think Fazul is a big embarrassment. Even if he's supposed to be a puppet, President Kenyatta will better pick a better puppet. Because, look, it's quite basic. Even somebody who has not gone to law school will know. If this is a company, there is no way it can be an NGO. Okay. So for somebody who claims to be a chair of such a serious body to make such a monumental mistake, I think it's a big egg on whoever sits behind him as the principal. Okay. It's an embarrassment.
Listen, so let's talk about the just concluded election. And there was a group of observers in the country. Apparently, it was the largest group we've ever had in Kenyan history. Is there anyone here who was an observer?
Yes, I was.
Oh, God, you're going to come under the fire here.
No, as long as it's friendly fire.
You're comfortable. Okay, so for purpose of this conversation, at least we have an observer who can help us understand what exactly they were doing. So could we listen to what John Kerry had to say? Remember, he was an observer under the Carter Center, the team that was here to just observe the election. Could we listen in?
Complaint, then there is a process, as I said very clearly, for the airing of that complaint and the appropriate democratic evaluation of whether or not that complaint is legitimate. Now, let's assume for a moment that it is. That there was somebody who somehow got in, if they did or didn't. The question is, were they able to change any material results? Were they able to change anything?
Okay, so the reason why I want us to have that conversation is that John Kerry went ahead and tweeted something. He said, "All people of Kenya are in my thoughts. I urge all to resolve complaints through the courts and for the police to allow peaceful assembly." There we go. Okay, right, there we go. And John Kerry has gotten quite some response, both from Kenyans in Kenya and abroad, and even U.S. citizens as well. Could we take a look at some of the responses that John Kerry had? Then we can have a conversation about really what the role of observers were in this election. There we go. That's Karamochi. Didn't you put the AOK on this election? Why would anyone be upset after that stamp of approval? Let's move on. Okay, so Esther Passaris, that is Nairobi woman rep. She says, when one of our most celebrated lawyers does not see our courts as an option for justice, it speaks volumes about our institutional failures. There we go. Free and fair elections are not based on long queues at polling stations. Your legacy has been damaged by endorsing a fraud election. Maybe you can take a look at one final one. So John Kerry actually wrote a book, and someone picked a page of that book of his, and just telling him that these are excerpts from your own book, A Call to Service, and they're saying he did exactly the opposite of what's in his book. So, gentlemen, why are people very upset with observers?
Well,
I think the observer should be the last person to speak. Let's start with
Okay.
And I think we'll start with Johnny Kerry himself. John Kerry is not any other Fazol. He's an accomplished lawyer, he's an accomplished diplomat. He's been in administration in the United States of America for a long period of time. I think it was incumbent upon John Kerry to have exercised more than due diligence in the report he claims to have given, a clean bill of health as regards this election. I think the voting itself was, so to speak, okay. And if you were to play a clip immediately before that, if you were to ask Kerry what was his observation, he said he only noticed this child who was being used time after time. For heaven's sake, that is all that John Kerry was able to notice. Now, what did you expect him to notice during the counting or the transmission of these results? Now, Honorable James Orengo has said something quite intriguing, and which some of us have done a lot of research on. The Carter Foundation has been known for the last 30 years to have been behind the dismantling of so many governments in developing countries. As we speak right now, John Kerry has participated a great deal in the Syrian war, the upheaval that we had in Libya, the upheaval that we had in Egypt. I think, on hindsight, it may have been quite clear that his intention coming here was not a noble intention. And you can see there was news going rounds that President Barack Obama is one of those who will
But to be fair, Harvey, they're not the only observers who gave this a clean bill of health.
Well, we can even go to Thabo Mbeki. Thabo Mbeki has no credibility even in his country. He was forced to resign because he was impeached by the African National Congress. He has so many credibility issues as a politician and as a national leader. And I do not think he was the correct person for the African Union to deputize for the purpose of this observation.
Harvey, is this about an individual or the role that observers played?
Well, the observer is supposed to play an oversight role to see that which the participants may not be able to see or may not be required to speak on freely. And it cannot lie in the mouth of these observers to say, okay, fine, what we've seen was okay. If there is anything that is outstanding, remedy it through the court process. It would have been better if I told this, anything you saw that was untoward in respect of this exercise, you point it out. Now, how do you interrogate it in a court of law if you've already said it's okay and you are a lawyer for heaven's sake?
Maybe you can say those are preliminary observations and we're still trying to figure out this mess.
Linda, there are two things about this. This Carter Center does observation all over the world, and they've got a track record of giving their reports, credible or otherwise. But the interim reports given by Kerry addressed the activities on the actual voting day, and he gave a clean bill of health. He said, as far as the observers are concerned, there was no voter suppression. There are people came out in numbers, and they cast their ballot. There were a few challenges, but immaterial to compromise the voting process. So they gave an interim report, and they said in the next 3 or 6 months, they're going to give another report, now a full one. Now, they've not given a view on results management. Because in Kenya always, the issue has never been whether or not people wake up early in the morning to go and cast their ballot, whether they queue for hours on end, whether they go with a baby and they use the baby to... That has never been a bone of contention. The bone of contention is results management. And in a link which has been sent out by the Carter Center, which is doing rounds on social media,
yes.
And one hopes that it's actually a genuine one, they still raise fundamental questions around the technology and how effective it was. Because they said a number of the observers noted that a transmission of data on 34A and 34B was a bit of a challenge. So that one he acknowledges. And I recall a sharp journalist, I think a sharp Kenyan journalist did ask him when he was presenting the report whether he's aware that there was hacking. He said he's had those allegations of hacking, and he said that NASA should go the extra mile to actually give evidence that in fact there was hacking, and if there was hacking, it compromised the quality of the election. So maybe that's something NASA needs to prove.
I remember he actually said there may have been attempts, but how successful
they were,
those attempts? Yeah.
Even the Ghanaian president said the same thing. When a question was posed, he said they don't have capacity to do any investigations, but they've had such kind of loud murmurs, and it's up to the Kenyan authorities to go the extra mile and find that. Now, the second matter then is the companies that are participated in our ICT at the IBC, most of them are American companies. So now the question you want to ask from a geopolitical level, if there was a failure in technology or there was a challenge in technology, would you expect John Kerry, an American diplomat, to actually accept liability that companies from back home had these kind of challenges? So those are the questions that people want to ask. And the reason why we are asking is the kind of backlash is getting back from home from some Republicans. And you recall, again, there was statements on social media that Trump has given his message of goodwill to President Kenyatta. But you've got a senior Republican who was fired by Trump asking this question.
Okay.
So there are so many things that we need to, I mean, it's very misty, it's very foggy. So you don't know who is saying the truth.
Okay, Javas, apparently you get the final word. You are an observer.
Now, first, I wouldn't want to join the Legion.
First of all, what scorecard did you give this election? I think you were with ELOG. Were you with ELOG?
Yes, with ELOG. I will come to the scorecard at the close of my remarks on this.
Okay, so we have a long presentation in other words.
Not a long presentation, but first, I think on the issue I would want to pronounce myself thus. I wouldn't join the legion of soothsayers who stand in the compound of the coward and point where the brave man used to live. I want to stand with the brave man and speak like this, as an observer, having joined the team of the others who pronounced themselves on having witnessed, walked around the various stations and saw how the election was being conducted. And having been in the process prior to this election, I would say this. As to an election being rigged, I would say that this has been a rigged election from the beginning, right from the primaries. An election does not take place on 8th or on the last day of the general election. It commences way before. No party in this country conducted a clear, clean, or pellucid and satisfactory primaries. No party whatsoever. So if it's a question of rigging the election, each party rigged right from the primaries. And therefore, none should come out, raise their heads above the waters, and claim that they're as clean as the term clean can be defined. But much more than that, when it comes to matters of observation of the general election itself, I'll say like this. All the observer groups, international observation groups that have delivered their reports, they have been very clear. First, that those are preliminary reports. And second, that their reports did not touch on the aspect of tallying and the transmission of results.
Okay. So all of you are on just the voting process?
That was during the voting process.
Okay.
ELOG on its part, of which I am a member, looked at the entire process all the way. In fact, we had a parallel voter tallying center, or vote tabulation center. And in fact, our results also are very clear. And they did not depart so much from the results that in the end were given by ABC. When it comes to criticism of Secretary Kerry, I'll say this. he can receive as many criticisms as possible. Locally, he'll receive close to 6 million criticisms because those were individuals that, as of now, supported NASA. If it's a question of accolades, he may receive as much as 8 million accolades of those individuals who supported President Kenyatta. And that's just to be it. What a big issue with is when this criticism goes to the character of the person. Because when these individuals, and with all due respect, say to even the person, the character and the profile of Secretary Kerry or even President Mbeki, these are distinguished individuals across the continent and their celebration is embraced internationally. But I think people are taking issue, especially now with Mbeki, for example, President Mbeki or Secretary Kerry, just because of their pronouncements or the report they gave on this election.
Okay.
Let us face it.
Let me ask you. Finish, then I'll ask you about it.
We should not just crucify these observers merely because we feel our position on this election is different from the kind of report that they have given.
Okay.
All right? And that was a preliminary report. If it was the conclusive report, then we would take issue. Now, the thing is this. Let's face it also. NASA has said, and even before the results were announced, that they demanded that the servers of IBC should be opened for the access of any person, including Jubilee itself and NASA itself. Now, look, we know very well that IBC could not heed and should actually not heed the directive of NASA at that time because it was still conducting its constitutional mandate, all right? And that is why at a time such as this, it is proper now that such a demand should or could be made, all right? Okay. And then it is a question of now taking, it would make sense to have the court demand or proclaim that let it be opened, the servers, and let it be, accessed by whosoever for purposes of verification. Okay. But not during that time.
Javi?
I think it's quite clear that the strength of support of the observer has come enormously from my colleague and relative here. We must give it to him. But I think the time frame within which an election petition has to be filed and determined in Kenya is a big factor to bear in mind in respect of what an observer is supposed to say. I believe it's on the basis of the reports, though preliminary, that were given by John Kerry and President Thabo Mbeki, that their respective organizations or states were able to give a thumbs up for this election. Now, if these were just preliminary reports and they are yet to make a final report within 6 months, then it would have been prudent for them to delay any such information that has come from their respective organization or states. Because by the time a report comes 6 months down the lane, and it's not one of those that will have been considered as evidence in an election petition, it will be of no use because they have already given sanction to the person that has already been declared as duly elected. It will be of no value.
Linda, the nature of these observer missions coming to Kenya, they're largely made of retired presidents or diplomats. And by their very nature, they're very conservative on their approach to issues. And one would even imagine that before Kerry says something, he probably needs to clear with the State Department, lest he gets into trouble with Trump. Yeah. So they're very conservative. There is not a single election in the world that they've ever gone to the top of a mountain and said that election was not free, it was not fair, it was not credible.
Is that factual?
They camouflage it, they say the election largely reflected the will of the people, although it had a few challenges. But not these few challenges is what creates a crisis. In Kenya, what created a crisis, 2007, it was then which was referred as a small challenge, but it was about managing results. When Kivuitu said, I have no idea who won this election. Now, a diplomat would describe it as a small challenge. Even right now, when Trump and North Korea, they're fighting all over, nobody would come out and draw a sword. They would say we're just having a crisis in communication. Our prioritization is not consistent. So there's nobody who comes out to call a spade a spade. And believe you me, Kerry doesn't come to Kenya because he loves Kenyans so much. He's coming here to pursue American national security interests.
So, let me ask you. So, in future, do people have a right to say, okay, fine, we don't need observers in this election. They're not adding any value to our election?
No, they must be around because the reports they give, if they're taken to IBC and IBC is very careful on studying, they can assist us do a postmortem. Because like what Kerry is going to report after 6 months, if there's going to be a matter in the Supreme Court, in 6 months we'll have a president, whether it's going to be President Kenyatta or not. So their report is going to be used to advise the 2022 election. So right now, we're actually having a conversation around these observer reports, and the train has already left the station. So let's run and jump to the other stop and wait for them in 2022.
Wait for them in 2022. Javas, wait for you guys in 2022.
Now,
What?
You see, this election has come under, so much criticism, especially on the issue of results. Whether they are international criticisms, I wouldn't want to take somebody like Scaramucci seriously, because even his boss did not take him seriously and was relieved of his duties. So his views to me are fairly cosmetic.
The rest of the guys?
Yeah. As to other guys, including myself, beyond, say, the team with which I was as an observer, I have to look at it also as a citizen of Kenya. And what we want are credible, fair, and verifiable elections. Now, when you look at 2013, you realize that the reports from the observation groups helped to inform the IEBC annual report of 2013. And they've been putting everything into the works to make sure that the election of 2017 gets to be fully and properly managed. And we'll all appreciate that ABC is not, and the manner in which it conducted this election is not exactly the manner in which it conducted the 2013 election.
There was an improvement?
There was an improvement. Okay. There was an improvement. There is an improvement. We have to give it to them. You see, they say that give the devil his due. The ABC is not the devil because actually, to some extent, to a great extent, it acted saintly. So I wouldn't say that give the devil his due. Give the saint his due.
Okay.
So, but still, I think as Kenyans, we have to bring ourselves to the conclusion that there have been a bit of issues with this election, especially to do with transmission of results. And because of that, that's where we are in a sort of political quagmire that we find ourselves in this moment. Whether it's a question of the position of NASA or the comfort and satisfaction of Jubilee. But moving forward, we don't need to shred our entire democracy or our entire country just because of this election. Much as I know very well that our nation and its, our brotherhood as a country is propelled by the wheels of democracy that must keep turning to take us forward.
Okay. It wouldn't be fair if we end this conversation without talking about that big announcement that everyone was waiting for from NASA, which never happened. That announcement was made by NASA's flag bearer, Raila Odinga. Could you listen into what he had to say? And then we'll finish this conversation on that note.
Nitaongea kesho kutwa. Alafu Jumanne tutatangaza mwelekeo. Kule tutaelekea. Sawa.
Okay, so sort of hoping to hear that point where Raila said they'll make a major announcement today. That didn't happen. And everyone was just sitting back and waiting what exactly are these guys going to say. Dismas, what did you expect?
I expected so many things, but before I say that, when we go for an election, there's a general assumption that your vote actually counts. I guess that's why the lawyers say that for you to become president in Kenya, it's a 50% plus one. So when I went to cast my ballot, actually I was under the impression that mine is the one which is going to determine, and everybody. But we are told that in other societies, it's not your vote which counts. It's the person who is counting your vote that counts. Now that's very important. So IBC is supposed to come up with those predictable systems, so that if IBC declares Dismas Mukua as valid elected as the President of the Republic of Kenya and have beaten Harvey and Javas, the two can go home knowing that it was a sound beating, it was free, fair, and credible.
50+1.
Yeah. Now, the reason why I'm saying this, a number of people have been saying Mr. Raila Odinga has been a mischievous man. is creating tension in the country, is making people anxious, and he should have done the most honorable thing. Upon IBC declaring President Kenyatta a winner, he should have made a concession speech. But you see, Raila Odinga says, actually don't know whether I won, and I don't know whether I lost. So how do you expect me to make a concession speech? Now, my expectation today was he was going to tell us why he thinks he won this election and why President Kenyatta should not be sworn into office. So that's the announcement people are waiting for the entire day. And you can believe me, people had coffee ready and popcorn in front of the TV sets waiting for that announcement. So later on in the evening, we were told by Musalia Mudavadi that come down, it's coming tomorrow. So even tomorrow, we are not very sure. Because, you know, some of these leaders, when they tell you tomorrow, you're not sure whether they still want to create that anxiety, whether they want to make anxious, or whether, in fact, they're flexing the muscles, telling President Kenyatta that we can actually, we have got the capacity and ability to make the entire nation nervous while we don't have the instruments of power. But for me, what I expected him to do, followed by what Orengo had indicated, that he's got a very strong case. He wants to prosecute, not at the Supreme Court as we see it, but in the court of public opinion. So I expected him to come and lay down his allegations. You recall he made some allegations to IBC. Chebukati said, thanks a lot for the allegations. I'm going to address them after I declare President Kenyatta president. So those are the allegations I expected him to lay bare so that people can now start asking themselves, is it making sense or not? Like, for instance, I think maybe the reason why they decided to withhold the announcement is when they discovered that Chiloba does not have all the forms available.
Yes.
So I guess now they had done a statement. They said, okay, let's sleep over it, amend 2 paragraphs. Then now tomorrow morning, we can release the statement.
Working for them.
Well, I think what Raila may have intended to say today could be clear from the tweet he made on Sunday in the afternoon. He said, each vote must count and each vote will count. Now, he said he will demonstrate to the entire world what a fraud and what a charade the IBC claims to have done in the guise of conducting a free, fair, and credible election.
He will demonstrate.
He will demonstrate to the entire world. And I think the world is now beginning to perceive what his demonstration will have been. You can see the SEK charge said on its part it requires a forensic audit of the transmission and tallying system. Now, it is my expectation that what Raila may want to do is to indicate on the basis of what may be his parallel tally that I won with this margin. Now, it's upon the people of Kenya to consider whether on the basis of what I've indicated here, what President Uhuru Kenyatta claims to have been his rightful win is correct. And if that be the case, should you, the people of Kenya, allow IBC, allow the mechanism set out under the Constitution and the statute to legitimize otherwise what on the face of it appears to be a fraud. And I think over and above that, and he said this without mincing words, he will demonstrate to the African Union, he will demonstrate to the United Nations that the election in Kenya was not free and fair. And I think over and above the avenue available domestically of pursuing an election petition, somebody in the shoes of Raila has the option of petitioning the United Nations. He has the option of petitioning the African Union.
But the United Nations are also on record telling him to just follow the legal process.
Well, the United Nations have not seen what evidence he has.
Oh, okay.
So they're most likely to tell him, look, under these conventions, we have the right to sanction this government for a period of 6 months and ask them to ensure that the constitutional order is restored and is obeyed. And if that be the case, it is my humble view, many of us who think that Raila ought to have left this thing, if he shows us evidence, we'll tell, look, this is what you've shown the church. This is what you've shown the people of Kenya. This is what you've shown the United Nations. This is what you've shown the African Union. So to speak, this is what you've shown the world. Now show it to the court. If the court refuses to agree with you, then we'll say for a fact that the charade moved beyond IBC and went to the judicial system. But unless and until he's able to demonstrate that, I think it may not be proper on his part to continue calling upon people not to go to work, to continue declaring public holidays in the manner in which he's been doing. I think Let him do that.
Okay.
We'll have closure.
Linda, just give me a minute to buttress my point. If you lose a relative in a manner that is suspicious, say with the police, like right now, if you lose a relative and you suspect he was shot by the police, and there's going to be a post-mortem, there'll be a government pathologist doing the post-mortem. But any interested party is invited to send a pathologist, so that when the government pathologist gives an opinion, the other pathologist will say, this guy was not shot, somebody had his head twisted. Now, so for me, I'm unable to understand why IBC is embarrassed to allow NASA, Jubilee, and any other interested party to look at the server. Anybody saying that it's unfair for them to open up the server, I think is being cheeky, because this is public information.
Okay.
This is not classified information. Why shouldn't you have access to this information? Or if they don't want to do that, why can't we do a forensic audit? Because I've spoken to forensic auditors. They say if they have to look at the logs on the 7th, 8th, and 9th, it will just take 3 hours.
Okay. Javas, you get the final word.
Well, upon the streaming of the presidential results, the NASA supporters and the principals coiled and recoiled in a whimper. And Raila himself sat perhaps and asked himself, who moved my cheese? Now, today, the entire country waited with bated breath to have Raila Odinga, flanked with the principals to make an announcement with religious and missionary thrill. That did not happen. It has been postponed. But the thing is this. Of course, there are those who take the perspective or the view that perhaps the momentum has been slowed amongst the NASA supporters after the time that's lapsed since the declaration of results by the IBC. But we expect that we need to have a critical national conversation about the truth of the presidential results and see whether we need to trace our footsteps. Now, there's the whole field of speculation is that maybe, and by way of provision of law, that perhaps members of the National Assembly or members of Parliament affiliated to NASA, upon taking oath in a few short days,
I've heard that,
may choose to resign and then throw the nation back into election. But of course, we know very well that that remains speculation. Some members of Parliament went through by a whisker. They expended a lot as to whether...
Legally, can that happen?
No, it won't happen. I mean,
it won't even happen.
It doesn't make sense because...
It cannot even happen. And if there's somebody that is banking on that, then I think their hope is not bankable.
All right.
But now, moving forward...
You have 30 seconds, Java.
Yes. To Raila Odinga, it is proper for us to appreciate that he is a national leader, a celebrated leader. His days are not done on earth. And he needs to continue playing a part to make our nation better. His announcement tomorrow, let it be an announcement that does not put fire under the feet of this country or these citizens in this country, but seeks to make a nation more cohesive and more peaceful.
That would be a good place to end it. Javas Bigambo, Nelson Harvey, Dismas Mukua. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and for being part of Kivumbi 2017. Allow me to leave it at that, people. Have a good night. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm Linda Ogutu.